Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our historian hats and taking a century-spanning journey through one of the absolute most fascinating geopolitical evolutions of the modern era. We're going to dive deep into the historical pacts between the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia over the past 120 years. Seriously, we're going to trace how this relationship completely evolved, from a desert protectorate all the way to a modern multipolar defense powerhouse.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Forging the first pacts. 2. Sovereignty and the Treaty of Jeddah. 3. The Al-Yamama arms deal. 4. Balancing law and alliances. And finally, Section 5, a century of security.
Okay, let's get right into it with this timeline. It maps out a literal time-traveling journey through more than a century of shifting power dynamics. We're starting way back in the sands of 1915 during World War I, and we'll end up in the incredibly complex, multipolar world of 2026. Every single one of these pacts, they represent a massive, fundamental shift in how these two nations leverage power, resources, and security.
To really understand where we are today, we have to start at the very beginning. Section 1. Forging the first pacts in 1915.
The year is 1915. World War I is completely raging. The British are urgently, and I mean urgently, searching for allies on the Arabian Peninsula to counter the Ottoman Empire. So, on December 26th, on the island of Tarout, they signed the Treaty of Dhahran with Abdulaziz Al Saud. This treaty officially made the lands of the House of Saud a British protectorate. For the British, the main goal was to guarantee the sovereignty of Kuwait, Qatar, and the Trucial States by bringing Ibn Saud's territories firmly under their military protection.
Now, just think about the stark contrast in the power dynamic back then compared to today. Let's break down the terms of the Dhahran Pact. The UK guarantees military protection, hands over a £20,000 loan, an initial shipment of arms, and a monthly stipend of £5,000. In exchange, Abdulaziz is recognized as the ruler of Najd. Sure, but he had to promise not to engage with other foreign governments or cede any lands to them. It was very much a subordinate relationship, heavily reliant on British funding and British weapons.
But as you might guess, that dependency didn't last long. Just over a decade later, the global landscape completely shifted. Let's look at that turning point in Section 2, Sovereignty, and the Treaty of Jeddah in 1927.
This is where we see a remarkably rapid elevation of the Saudi state's geopolitical status. By 1927, the British realized the Dhahran Treaty just wasn't valid anymore, so they re-engaged in negotiations. The result? The Treaty of Jeddah. Gone is the protectorate status. Gone are the constraints on foreign policy. Instead, the British officially recognized the complete independence and sovereign rule of Ibn Saud over the kingdom of Hejaz and Najd. They were now placed on equal diplomatic standing. I mean, to go from a protectorate to total recognized sovereignty in just 12 years, that is an astonishing evolution.
And here is a really fascinating, lesser-known detail buried in the source materials about that 1927 treaty. 263. Under Article 7 of the Treaty of Jeddah, the king formally agreed to cooperate with the British legation in fighting the Red Sea slave trade. The treaty explicitly gave the British legation the right to manumit, or free, enslaved Africans seeking asylum. And according to the historical records, exactly 263 people were freed this way by 1938.
All right, let's jump forward in time to the 1980s. The geopolitical landscape has transformed entirely, bringing us right into Section 3, Al-Yamama, Arms for Oil in 1985.
Enter Al-Yamama. In Arabic, it literally translates to the dove. But the reality of this geopolitical agreement is a massive juxtaposition to its peaceful name. Al-Yamama is actually the name of a series of record-breaking arms sales by the United Kingdom to Saudi Arabia. In fact, it's been described in the sources as the biggest British sale ever of anything to anyone. It was absolutely massive.
So the really crucial point here is how this massive deal was actually funded. 600,000. That is the number of barrels of crude oil delivered per day to the British government as payment for these weapons. Let that sink in. It wasn't a standard cash transaction at all. It was a literal arms for oil exchange of sheer, staggering magnitude.
Let's break down exactly what was ordered here. The initial 1985 Memorandum of Understanding secured a giant military arsenal for the Royal Saudi Air Force. We are talking 48 Tornado ground attack aircraft, 24 Tornado air defense variants, plus 60 different trainer aircraft. And remember, this was just the first phase. It eventually expanded to include Eurofighter Typhoons and some seriously sophisticated weaponry. And the financial impact of all this? £43 billion. That is the revenue generated by the prime contractor, Base Systems, over 20 years of this deal.
This staggering number really cemented an unbreakable economic and industrial lifeline between the two nations, ultimately employing thousands of people in both countries.
But an alliance of this magnitude, one that's moving billions of pounds and highly sensitive military hardware, eventually faced a massive stress test. Let's move to Section 4, Balancing Law and Alliances, 2006.
According to the source material, the Aliyamama deal became the center of a major controversy. In the early 2000s, the UK's Serious Fraud Office, the SFO, started investigating allegations that massive slush funds and bribes were paid out to secure these contracts. Now, this investigation carried severe geopolitical weight, mainly because at the exact same time, BAE Systems was in the middle of negotiating a brand new, multi-billion-pound sale of Eurofighter Typhoons to Saudi Arabia.
Behind the scenes, the pressure was just immense. As documented in our sources, the head of the SFO reported receiving direct warnings about the potential loss of Saudi counter-terrorist cooperation if the investigation continued. The stakes were framed not just as commercial interests, but as a dire matter of national security. Officials were warned that, quote, British lives on British streets were at risk.
Ultimately, the British government intervened. On December 14, 2006, Attorney General Lord Goldsmith announced the investigation was being dropped entirely. Let's let the official source text speak for itself here. He stated, "It has been necessary to balance the need to maintain the rule of law against the wider public interest. No weight has been given to commercial interests."
So how exactly did the UK officially justify halting the probe? The sources explicitly point to a few key things: safeguarding national and international security, maintaining crucial counterterrorism cooperation, and preserving broader strategic interests in the Middle East. It objectively demonstrates that when push came to shove, deep security and diplomatic alliances ultimately overrode domestic legal proceedings. It really proved just how vital this historical pact had become to both nations.
Having weathered that storm, the relationship definitely stabilized. But Saudi Arabia started looking toward a very different, much more multipolar future. Welcome to Section 5, A Century of Security, 2017 to 2026.
You can see the historical continuities so clearly in September 2017. Exactly 90 years after the landmark 1927 Treaty of Jeddah, the UK and Saudi Arabia are back in the exact same city. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UK Defense Secretary sign a brand new framework agreement to review and enhance joint coordination in defense and counterterrorism. The core alliance, it seems, remains strong.
But let's see how this builds into our present day. Fast forward to August 2026. The geopolitical map has radically shifted. Against the backdrop of the 2026 Iran war and some really severe regional instability, Saudi Arabia signs the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement. But notice something here. This time, it's not with the UK. It is a trilateral collective defense pact with Pakistan and Turkey. They are bringing together vast oil wealth, a nuclear power, and NATO's second-largest army. And most importantly, it explicitly stipulates that an armed attack on one is considered an attack on all. Saudi Arabia is aggressively diversifying its security strategy, weaving a web of partnerships well beyond its traditional Western allies to ensure self-reliant regional stability.
Which brings us to a really fascinating conclusion. We've traced this incredible journey, all the way from the 1915 Treaty of Dhahran, where Saudi lands were literally a British protectorate, to the 2026 Mecca Agreement, where Saudi Arabia is now leading a trilateral defense pact with major regional powers. So it really leaves you wondering, after 120 years of relying heavily on the UK and the West for its security architecture, what does the next century of Saudi Arabia's alliances actually look like? How will this massive shift alter the future balance of power in the Middle East? It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.